So this video tackles presenting materials, more specifically using Marmoset toolbag to do that, which is much the same way as you would do it with objects, but there's a few things you can do to try and really help your materials pop. So I just thought I'd show the setup for that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've saved out an FBX file that I'm going to use, which I've actually got from, so in my algorithmic install, if I go to Designer, I go to Tool Resources, View 3D, I go to Shapes. There's the shapes that are in the viewer. In Substance Designer you can actually pull out as FBX files. So this one I use a lot for the previewing sphere stuff on a sphere. This sphere 2 tiles, so it tiles the texture 2 times. So File, Import Model, here sphere 2 tiles, open, and so this is what I'm going to use to do my sphere, and I'm just going to map the material onto that. I'm going to use the Unreal 4 template. It just means it's set up for metalness right from the get-go, so I don't have to fanny about doing that. So we're going to use this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to load in the maps that I need for this to work. So I'm going to click on my normal map and I'm going to go to one of the Alchemist maps we were working on. I'm going to use this stone water because it should give us a good sense of like how the height works and things like that. So I'm just going to grab the normal map, stick that on there, flip Y because it's a DirectX map. So we need to flip it in Y and go to the gloss map, and I'm going to use the roughness, and because it's a roughness rather than a gloss we need to invert it, which it's set up to do already because it's the Unreal map. So you can see we're starting to get something already. The albedo is the base colour, so we'll go for that. The metalness, there is no metalness, so we can actually just switch that to 0, and that will give us it will give us what we want. And we have an occlusion map, so I'm just going to click on here, click occlusion, and I'm just going to click on there and drop my occlusion map in there. And we don't have a cavity map, so what I tend to do is I just load the occlusion map into there. I'll switch diffuse cavity off so that we're getting specular cavity reflection. So that basically means that no specular light is going to get into the into those darker areas. But we can tweak all of that as we go along. It's a bit dark at the minute, but we're kind of on our way. I'm just going to brighten that up a bit so we can actually see what's going on. And we also have a height map, so what we can do is we can actually push some of this detail out. So if we go up to displacement and I click height and then grab our height map, it'll do that, which is a bit crazy. So I'll pull the scale down a bit and see what's going on. Let's just push it a little bit so we can see a bit more what's going on. And then under subdivision we can go to PN triangles, and then I can push the tessellation a bit more just so we can see what's actually going on. So if you click on the mesh you can see how much detail's in there. If I pull the tessellation down there's less. You'll start to hear my fan kicking in as we do this. It's a bit processor heavy. And obviously you get issues like this at the top where it's kind of squeezing into a point and it all goes a bit crazy. So you just have to be a bit careful. So yeah, so there we go. There's the basis of our material. We've got some water and we've got some bits of rock. It may be that this tiling doesn't quite work for you because you want to see a bit more of the material, and obviously it's wrapping around on itself. So you can go up into here and you can play with both the tiling, so you can push it up to like maybe 1.4 so you can see a bit more of it, and obviously this is where that will actually break the tiling around the back of it, so you just need to make sure that you're facing this way on the mesh. And then you might have the issue then that your it's the wrong part of the mesh. Let's drop into here and just rotate this round a bit more so we get the sky on the front of the object. Pull the brightness up again. So it may be that then, because this is tiling to 1 point, if this is set to 2, you wouldn't have a problem, it would tile perfectly. Because you're setting it to something like 1.4, then you're going to get this. But it's fine as long as you don't face that way. But then you might think, well, this isn't exactly the bit of the texture I wanted to see. Well, you can use these offsets, so you can turn. So this is turning your UVs, not turning your object. So say you prefer, you want to see that part of the mesh, and you want to have something like that, for instance, then you can do all of that within here. I might just pull the scale of this down a little bit so it's not quite so obvious. So the next thing is to then try and set up some lights. So what you want to do is you want to find a sky that's going to work for you. You could load a sky in. So with this preset, obviously there's presets here. I'm sure you all know how to use Marmoset, so I don't want to show you how to suck eggs. But maybe something like evening clouds is a good starting point. Obviously it's a bit dark, but something with that light there. Pull the brightness up a little bit. It's maybe something that's in line with the kind of feel, whereas this might not quite work so well, or maybe it does. It's kind of up to you. So what I would do is I'd have a sort through what you think works for you. I don't think this stuff works so well because it's too industrial. Maybe something like mountain sunset. So this is kind of like your ambient light, and this is probably a good start. So then what you can do is, obviously you can drag lights in if you want to, but for doing this kind of stuff I think it's easier, or it's kind of more effective, to actually just use the child lights that are in here. So if I just click in here, you can start to see where that light's being placed. So say I wanted to have some light coming from up here, for instance, I wanted some sort of highlight, like using a sort of 3-point light rig. So I wanted to use this to sort of create some sort of rim light. Then I could drop that in there. I could then go back into this light and actually change its brightness so that it covers more of that area, or I could actually move it. And because it's a directional light, then it actually doesn't really matter too much where it's placed. We're only just trying to get a sense of direction on it. We'll pull the brightness down, kind of get something like this. So we're getting this kind of like light coming round on the top of the surface. Maybe make it so it's like more like sunlight, so it's kind of like more in this sort of like yellow range, kind of warmer. When you're getting these harsh highlights, you could actually go into here and change the size of the shape. We'll hopefully flatten some of that out a little bit more. So you could go for something like that. So say you've started with that as the idea, then you probably want to put some more ambient lighting into here, and you can maybe go on the opposite side. So if we go for something down here, for instance, that'll do. Then I'll go for the secondary light. I'm going to change the brightness of that so I can see what it's doing. Push it more towards blue. That's starting to shape that round. Maybe like it more like that, so it's more like a rim light, so it's like helping that along. And it's shaping that. And then maybe we want something in here. So you can see you're starting to actually sort of pull some of these forms out.
then you can go back into here and you can play with things like the let's pull the display up a little bit more just so it's a little bit more interesting. You can play with things like the horizon smoothing, so that'll control the Fresnel on the edges, which will help sort of shape that round a bit more if you want. And you're starting to get a sense of kind of what that maybe should look like. Then the problem you're going to have with this is if you then go back to here and say, right, that's alright, but I want to change my sky. If you go to change this sky now, you'll lose all of this information, like all these lights, and actually you may want to just keep the lights. So this is like a good sort of starter. So if you take the lights out and drop them outside of the sky so they're not connected to the sky anymore, just drop them on the top of the scene like that, and you can go back to your sky and you can sit and you can rotate your sky to get the reflections you want without rotating any of the lights. So you might want something like that, so then you can get this shape through there. Or it may even be that now you've got that, you maybe want to try out a few different, some different maybe you want something that's more like that to go with it instead, and actually your sky lights stay exactly the same. So let's just go back to this. I'm just going to set this something like that so that we're getting what feels almost like a highlight around it. Actually, I'll pull it around there so I get more of that running through it. There we go. I can control the background brightness. I can swap that out so we could have the sky in there as it is. We could have a blurred version of it, in which case I can set how much it blurs, but I still think there's a bit too much colour in that, and I quite like the ambient sky, so that takes like a more ambient, it takes a version of this but like a really small sample, so it's kind of generally blue with some tones through it, and then I'll play with the brightness of it. Or you can just drop a colour in, so you can set it to a colour and you can pick what that colour is. So I can have, whatever colour I want. But I tend to use this one just because I like it. So there we go. So as a starter, we've got something that kind of feels like it maybe works. Maybe it just needs to be a little bit brighter. So if we're happy with that, then there's a few other things we want to set up. If I just go to my scene, go to the renderer, we want to have the local reflect. We'll try local reflections, see if that makes an improvement. It probably evens that out a little bit more. We want to enable GI, so that's global illumination. The way the global illumination works is it uses voxels. So if we can show those, we basically can see how the voxels are working. And we can switch that off, and then what we can do is we can control the amount of contribution that's making. So if I pull the brightness up on that, that will allow it to use this global illumination term that it's using. So I think that probably works a little bit better. I can drop ambient occlusion in, but we've got ambient occlusion in there using across the object as well, so we're probably going to get a little bit more control from that. So we'll maybe leave that. So then once we've got that set up, so there are kind of like global settings set up, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the main camera. So this is the camera we're looking through. If I set it to safe frame, you can actually see the texture that would be output. You can see what size it would actually be. Let's have a look. And then there's a bunch of stuff we can set up. You can set up depth of field. So if I switch that on, you can start to get some blurring. The way it works is the near blur controls in front of the focal point. The far blur controls after the focal point. If you want to set your focal point, you can
the easiest way to do it is to, you can do it here, but it's easier to just middle click where you want it to focus. So if I pull my near blur down and if I blur up, you can see that when so I'm just middle clicking, and where my mouse is becomes the focal point. So I'm going to have a near blur of nothing, so it's basically up until that point it's completely in focus. I'm going to set my far blur so it just starts to take the edge. Now that will help hide this nonsense at the top, so it's worth probably doing on something like this, but you won't maybe want to do it on everything. And then I can change the bokeh size, which basically is just how the blur actually works, the intensity of it and how it behaves. So I can have a large bokeh there and maybe pull the blur back a bit. So it is quite blurred around the edges, this one, but it does hide that quite well. And under distortion, I mean, you can add a flare, but they don't work so well, I don't think. You can add chromatic aberration if you want, so you can just basically put a little bit of RGB splitting on the edges. If you push it all the way, you end up with something like that, but just a little bit on the where it's just kissing the edges can add quite a bit of atmosphere to it. And then in post effects, which is a bit like how it works in Unreal, you can control exposure with the camera, so I can make it brighter overall. I can push the contrast, so I can make the darkers darker, the lighter parts lighter if I want. And I've got a contrast center, so if I push the contrast and then push the contrast center, it basically filters the contrast a bit more. And then you've got saturation, so I can push the colour a bit more as well. On top of all of that, there's different ways it tone maps, so linear, or it can go for Reinhard, which in this case gives you something a bit softer, or you can go for something that's filmic, and then you can adjust for those things, and they're just settings to try and make things look a bit more either realistic or... So if I go for this Reinhard, you see we get something that's a lot softer, and I want to pull the exposure down a bit, maybe push the contrast a little bit, pull saturation back. Or I'll go for this filmic, and I can push the exposure a little bit more. You can see you're really starting to sort of shape something that's feels like it's got lots of personality. Also, you've got the option to play with curves. You've got some presets that you can use, most of which are a bit rubbish, I'll be honest. I don't rate. But you can see that you can really push stuff if I clear that. But you can edit this yourself. You can either go for like a general, where you're just sort of trying to... So this curve is basically managing the transition between light and dark. So I can basically get more white, more lighter or brighter colours into this image, and then the same way I can push the darker colours, so I can get something that feels really sort of post-apocalyptic if I want, and I can push that wherever I want. The curves are something to play with, so you can kind of start to figure out what works. So it may be that we just want to generally get a bit more darkness in there, and just get a bit more transition in the image. If you find your computer's having a bit of a mare doing this, you can press this, and this will basically mean that it will disable a bunch of stuff that makes it kind of a bit more responsive. So say you can do that, but the other thing you can do is you can split these per channel. So say you want it to you want it to be lighter, but you want to kind of push the reds a bit more, and maybe in the darker areas you want it to have less red, so that's more of the blue and green come through. Pull the greens away a bit from that, but you want to get more of them at this level. And this, you want to be subtle with this. You can actually get quite a lot of control. And I'm going to like over crank this just for the purpose of showing, you know, what you can do with it. And so let's push that there. So now we're really starting to get something that has some personality. Possibly a bit too much for a render, but you know, it's just to show the stuff off more than anything else. If you find that you're not really getting the stuff to cut through well enough, like the textures to cut through well enough, there's a sharpen filter which helps sharpen those things up a little bit more. And you can pull in some brightness if you want, you know, to make it a bit more fuzzy. And you can kind of concentrate where that effect happens. I'm going to tone that right down for this one. And you can add a vignette as well if you want. So you can pull that into the edges so it focuses a bit more on here. Now it may be that you're going to end up cropping this, so maybe you don't need it. And the other thing to watch with the vignette is people tend to do this, and then you can also change the colour. So if we wanted to have more, like say there's like more yellow or green in this, you want to have more green come through, you can do that as well, and soften it out a bit so that the focus becomes a bit more of that. And you can add grain to it if you want, so you can grain it up or grain it down. I don't tend to do too much with that. But from having the thing you just brought in, we now have something which is probably a bit closer to something we'd want to help show that off. So if we're happy with that, then we just need to go to where do we need to go? Settings, and we can set how we capture it. So I tend to think you don't really need too much of this. I mean, you don't really need more than 16 times sampling, but you probably want this to be a little bit bigger. You'll want it probably to be the size, either size you're going to use, or maybe a little bit bigger so that you can scale it down. But if we went for like, you know, something like that sort of size, we did 16 times sampling, and we don't want to save out transparency because we're going to hold this background. If you want it to be on a transparent background so you can put your own background in, then do that. You can change the format. PNG is fine for what we want to do. And if we're happy with all of that, hit OK, and then you can capture an image with F11, or you can capture it and open it with F10, or just straight to your clipboard, and you can go straight to ArtStation if you want, but I'm just going to go for image and open so we can see what we get. So you just leave it to do it, and it will sit and capture it, and then it will open it up, and there you go. This is our image of our texture. Obviously you can then take that, you could take that into something like Potato Shop. Okay, so we've got this open in Potato Shop, and I think this is just getting cropped slightly, so if I just go to filter, we can just pick something like a sharp and unsharp mask, our old friend. You can see that we can apply, you know, something like that just to help just pull it out a little bit more. You can add your own, you know, graphics and details and stuff to it if you want to, or maybe badges for how you've made it, things like that. But there you go, that's your kind of image of your texture made, and the lighting's helping sort of sell the shape of it.